Greetings. So, doing a little bit of cleanup on the lettering experiment here. Kind of want to explain a little bit of what the lettering here is kind of going into here. So, repair the ship. There's no time to waste, not a minute to spare. So, the whole point of this story, and it's part of a larger, longer storyline, is something came out of nowhere that no one on the ship had seen. It didn't show up on the scanners, didn't show up on any of the systems on the ship, and just briefly collided with the ship and ripped a hole in the side of the ship. And these fellows are struggling to repair the ship before it drifts too far off course. There's not a minute to spare. Because if they don't, they run out of air and they freeze to death. And that leads to the second paragraph. No, not to stay alive, we cannot die. And that's the thing with these characters is they can't die. And that's part of the plot, and this will be explained further as the story progresses. Pardon my head bumping into the tripod here. I'm filming this with an 85mm manual focus, lens on a macro tube on a well-worn, beat-up Nikon D4. Not the videographer's ideal, but hey, it is what it is. But these fellows they can't be killed. The worst that happens to them, they can't die. There's a scene in the sketchbook, sketchbook draft, the original draft, the progenitor of this story, where one of the villains is crushed to death. And even as he's crushed to death, he's still alive. He's a pulverized mess of goo ground into the stone, and he's still alive. And there's something about that in the premise and the plot of the story. You have a civilization of people who don't suffer any kind of death, any kind of fear of death, any kind of sense of mortality. You look at so many of the things that you can do in life, but you don't do them because you risk life and limb. But what if you couldn't die? And it reshapes and changes the character of civilization if all the members of that civilization can't die. I'm almost out of ink in this bottle. And it seems excessive to go this route with this cross-hatching over the lettering. It runs the risk of making it too busy, which I comprehend that. But I have a fixation on patterns and textures. And it was in the previous page 4 But I was thinking to myself, I have this block of dialogue, this block of lettering that I want to do, but I don't want to do it with a block of just flat black. So just on a spur of a moment, I decided, well, why don't we do that? You're using this liquid frisket. See what it can do. And that initial experiment worked quite well. My lettering isn't that great, but it's the fact that the lettering isn't professional and smooth. I mean, I could go on the computer and make CGI lettering. It seems a cheater thing to do. But for the most part, I try to avoid, using a straight edge as much as I can, except for an absolute utility where it requires it. We'll go on to the next paragraph. To avoid being left to drift in space, inert, frozen, to fall into the depths of nothing, into eternity. So this one paragraph here, and the reason why I'm explaining this is just it's the exposition. I don't want to make this seem like it's a picture book, because there's going to be dialogue and all that. The first 5 pages were just to show the gradual progression of a ship in distress. But this paragraph here is kind of key to much of the plot as the story progresses, because there are factions of these fellows. Move his face up. Boom. Factions of these fellows where they choose this. They get into a spacesuit because it's protective. And they release themselves out into the vacuum of space. Because as they are, when they're frozen in a vacuum, they can't breathe, but they're alive. They're frozen, but they're alive. They're a popsicle, but they're conscious. They can't see, but they're conscious. And so there's a cult throughout the story, a cult that threads itself in the story over a long period of time, where they're called long sleepers, where these figures drift off into space, off into the boonies of space, willingly. For some kind of grand exposure to some divinity that they probably will never see, again, since these figures can't die. And that's part and parcel with the bald head. The bald head is an indication of how many times that these fellows have been forcibly ejected into space and frozen from incidents and accidents. Over the millennia that they have been in existence. And that's... So you have a group of people, soul survivors from Earth, and they leave Earth. The details that's probably going to be in the second book. I'm not getting into that. This story is going to be about 40 pages, and it's going to introduce some of the ideas that are going to go into further books. But you have these last survivors, and for a century in their ships, they drift in space. And they suddenly start suffering these ailments and these viruses, and there's no cure, and they start to die off. And so a doctor spends, apparently my stomach wants to make noises. A doctor struggles to find a cure for this disease that's killing them. And along the way, he finds something that causes them to stop aging, but they don't die. They stop dying. And I haven't, the details of that aren't specifically that terribly important for the progression of this, of the main plots of the story. I might go into it. I mean, it's really not going to be anything more specific than what you see out of a superhero. Well, why do lasers come out of his eyes? Well, superhero. Why does he have superhuman healing? Well, superhero. He can leap tall buildings in a single bound. Well, space alien, but superhero. You know, there's quite a bit of science fiction explanation into the characteristics of individual superpowers and superheroes. So it's not key to the main core of the story to get into that. It's one of those, it's a circumstance that they exist in. And for the most part, that's what they have. So, you know, is living defined by the fact that people are going to die? Is living specifically tethered to that very fact of mortality? And that's something that might be addressed in this story. There are plenty of other stories to express those ideas, but it does have a transformative effect on the mind of a human being. The limitations of mortality are removed, gone. So. That looks sufficient. Maybe a little bit here and there. A little bit spot here, a little spot there. So, anyway. I've encumbered my channel with an endless number of shorts, and I need to do these longer form videos that I ramble at. I got a little lav mic here plugged into a Zoom that's plugged into the D4. So we'll see how this turns out. So anyway, thank you for watching.